In the 1950s, the American School of Classical Studies made a sensational discovery on the Peloponnese. Under the direction of Professor John Langton Caskey, a large building was excavated, displaying distinctive architectural features. The presence of a staircase revealed that the house had 2 floors and a tiled roof, indicating a high level of technological advancement. This type of house was particularly prevalent in Greece in the 7th century BC. However, the building itself was dated between 2500 and 2200 BC, challenging the existing understanding of early Bronze Age settlements on the Greek mainland. At that time, it was believed that there were no complex building and settlement structures on the mainland, unlike on islands like Crete, where larger settlements already existed. It would be a few decades and centuries later that the famous palaces of the Minoans would emerge on Crete. On the mainland, it was the Mycenaeans who built similar palaces. The so-called House of Tiles in Lerna was ultimately destroyed by fire around the 22nd century BC. Since then, we have come closer to uncovering the origins of the Greeks. We have made new archaeological discoveries and gained insights. And today, we will embark on a journey to explore the first settlements in the early Bronze Age on the Greek mainland. We will shed light on how the people of the time, as well as those in the Middle Bronze Age, lived, and we will also try to find out whether the destruction of Lerna and other sites is linked to an invasion by new groups of people from the north. Before delving deeper into the history of the early and Middle Bronze Age of the Greek mainland, let's take a look at the country we now call Greece. One of the factors that played a significant role in the development of Greek culture and civilization was geography. Unlike other ancient civilizations, ancient Greece occupied a relatively small area, perhaps only 45,000 square miles of land. Most of it is quite mountainous, and another natural influence was the sea. Like today, ancient Greece had a long coastline with natural bays and arms of the sea, providing numerous safe harbors. The Greek mainland, which we will explore historically today, encompasses central Greece, including regions such as Attica, Euboea, Phocis, Boeotia, Thessaly and the Peloponnese, where you can find Laconia, Argolis and Corinthia. The Bronze Age in Greece starts around 3200 BC and is divided into the early, middle and late periods. The late periods, and therefore the Bronze Age itself, ends around 1100 to 1050 BC. The Bronze Age gets its name from the widespread production and use of bronze, marking the end of the Stone Age. On the Greek mainland, the Bronze Age periods are also referred to as Early, Middle and Late Helladic. Let's return to Lerna, where the House of Tiles was discovered. The ancient site is located in present-day Argolis, south of Argos on the Peloponnese. Like many larger settlements in the early Bronze Age, Lerna had been inhabited since the Neolithic period and is situated along the coast. Generally, settlements were established near the coast on hillsides, peninsulas, or a combination of these. Trade relations with the Aegean island of Melos can be dated back to before the Bronze Age, based on obsidian findings. During the early Bronze Age, Lerna was among the larger settlements on the mainland, estimated to have housed approximately 200 to 700 people between 2800 and 2600 BC. Like other contemporary mainland inhabitants, the people of Lerna cultivated lentils, barley, beans, einkorn, and emmer. They also raised common domesticated animals such as donkeys, mules, cattle, sheep, and from 2200 to 2000 BC, horses. The cultivation of wine and olives on the early Bronze Age mainland, as in other mainland settlements, has not been proven and was initially limited to Crete. Additionally, Alongside animal husbandry and agriculture, the population engaged in fishing. Beside agriculture, the people of Lerna also produced pottery. Thus, goods in the style of Minoan pottery, prevalent on the Greek mainland until around 1600 BC, can be identified. The pottery was mostly unpolished and varied in color from black to brown and red, depending on the firing conditions. From large bowls and water jugs to smaller forms, some items were even painted. Red Minoan pottery was mainly found in Aegina in Attica, the northern Cyclades, and Boeotia. Imported pottery was also present, such as a jug characteristic of the city of Troy from the time period. Trade relations from Troy were also maintained by other regions further north in Greece, such as Macedonia, Chalkidiki, and Thessaly. Other places from which goods were imported to the mainland were the Cyclad Islands and Crete. In addition to bowls, jugs, pans, amphorae, and other everyday items, terracotta figurines were also produced. These often depicted animals such as sheep, cattle, or body parts of these animals. The representation of animal body parts, or in some cases intentionally opened bellies, may indicate slaughter practices or even ritual procedures. The roof of the house of tiles was also made of terracotta. However, its function remains a mystery to this day. Generally, the house is classified as a corridor house, and its function is interpreted as either a palace, administrative center, or a community house. In addition to the house of tiles, a double ring wall with 2 towers was also constructed during the same period. The corridor house, fortification, and uncovered seals are interpreted by some researchers as indications that social hierarchies already existed or were in the process of developing in Lerna and other settlements in Argolis. Archaeologists believe that the discovery of seals, mostly made out of stone or terracotta, could indicate the concept of private ownership. However, Lerna is no longer an unique example, as similar discoveries have been made since its excavation. For example, a comparable house was uncovered in Akovitika, located west of Kalamata on the Peloponnese. During the 21st century BC, the house of Lerna was eventually destroyed by fire, and we will attempt to explain what or who caused this fire or destruction later in the episode. Only 10 kilometers away from Lerna lies Tiryns, located on the opposite side of the same bay. Also inhabited since the Neolithic period, Tiryns was one of the most significant settlements on the mainland during the Early and Middle Bronze Age. This is particularly evidenced by the remains of an impressive circular structure on the upper citadel, surrounded by further constructions from that time. The characteristic house form for the Early Bronze Age, as seen throughout the Aegean, is rectangular. Buildings with curved floor plans, whether round or apse shape, were not common until 2200 and 2000 BC. Houses were mostly single-story and U-shaped, constructed from clay. Typically, houses had a porch with up to 3 rooms, an inner chamber with a hearth, and rooms for storage and cooking. Klaus Kilian, the excavator, interpreted the monumental circular structure of Tiryns as a grain silo, dating from 2500 to 2200 BC. Other archaeologists consider a function as a watchtower more likely. Sometimes it is also interpreted as a fortified refuge where residents could seek shelter during times of war, or as a residence of a ruler. Walls and fortified settlements have been found in other areas of the Greek mainland as well, such as Baia in Corinth, Vassa, and Colonna on Aegina. Based on these architectural measures, researchers suggest that inhabitants sought to defend themselves against early piracy. Tiryns itself was so impressive that it became the namesake of the so-called Tiryns culture, which is dated from 2200 to 2000 BC. It followed the Kuraku culture, which ended around 2200 BC, approximately the time when the house of Lerna was destroyed. Around this time, Tiryns was also struck by destructive fires, but it remained inhabited. In other settlements like Colonna, no destruction was found, and there was likely a peaceful transition from the Kuraku to the Tiryns culture. However, the Tiryns culture was not limited to the mainland. It spread to the Ionian Islands in western Greece as well. Let's move further northwest in Greece. There, on an area of approximately 50 to 80 hectares, we find one of the largest settlements on the mainland, Manika. It is located on the island of Euboea by the sea and is believed to have been inhabited by a population ranging from 6,000 to 15,000 people between 2800 and 2200 BC. Its population size makes Manika the largest known settlement during the Early Bronze Age. The expansion of the city can likely be attributed to the maritime, commercial, and technological activities of its inhabitants. One of the specialized buildings in Manika was the so-called obsidian workshop. The structure consisted of a walled area with wooden shelters covering an otherwise open stone courtyard. Thousands of obsidian pieces, including flakes and various tools, were found in this workshop. Similar areas interpreted as metal workshops with melting furnaces have been discovered in other settlements, such as the workshop in the hearth room of the White House in Colonna and another small structure close to the settlement of Rafina in Attica. Metal objects were not only produced locally but also imported. For example, hafted and notched daggers, ales, and nails from the Troad on the Anatolian coast have been found. Copper can be traced to the early Bronze Age in Crete and the Cycladic, suggesting that the mainland initially relied on imports. Even more attention was drawn to the discovery of large cemeteries in Manika. These provide insights into burial rituals as well as other aspects of life and death among the settlement's inhabitants. Cemeteries were usually located outside of settlements, but in Manika they were very close. The cemetery of Manika is particularly significant because it covers a wide area and has yielded the most finds of ceramics, metal objects, and vessels. Burials took place in monumental rock-cut chambers, indicating a well-organized and hierarchical society. The graves were also waterproofed and the deceased were positioned in a seated position. Most grave goods were of Cycladic origin or came from the Anatolian coast, as well as other imported vessels and products from the Aegean. Children were also buried in the cemetery, sometimes in pots, a burial practice that would continue for thousands of years. The discovery of the cemetery and the burial methods used also support the theory that hierarchies and social classes already existed. Burials of wealthy and the poor differ not only in the construction of the graves, but also in the quality of grave goods. In general, the graves bear witness to the prosperity of Manika and its population during the Early Bronze Age. Moving further inland to the west of Manika, we find Thebes, located in the region of Boeotia. It is a city that is considered one of the longest inhabited cities in the world and the third oldest city in Europe. An estimated 4,000 to 6,000 inhabitants lived there between 2800 and 2600 BC on an area of approximately 20 hectares. What makes Thebes particularly unique is that it is the only known early settlement in the inland where walls were constructed. In addition to the walls, we also find corridor houses in Thebes, which were often built in isolated locations and next to the settlement walls. A similar layout of corridor houses can be found in Colonna on Aegina. The typical roof form of the house was a flat roof, and in Thebes, there were already multi-story buildings. The deceased were mostly buried in chamber tombs in Thebes, which were accessed through a corridor known as a dromos. Gold pendants were found on a burial mound in the settlement, which, due to their depiction of papyrus, suggest an Egyptian origin. This could potentially indicate extended trade relations with Egypt. Theodorus Spyropoulos, who excavated the burial mound, saw the gold pendants as evidence of Egyptian settlement in Boeotia. However, researchers would need a much larger amount of archaeological evidence to confirm this hypothesis. Between 2200 and 2000 BC, Thebes was also struck by destruction, often associated with an influx of Indo-European people from the north. Despite this destruction, Thebes, like Tiryns, likely remained inhabited, and during the late Helladic period, rich warrior graves with precious weapons and other offerings, including gold, became more prominent. Typical goods in the style of Minoan pottery, as well as the so-called matte-painted pottery, can also be found. But let us now turn to the people themselves, who lived in all those settlements during the early and middle Helladic periods. The presence of modern humans, Homo sapiens, can be traced back in Greece to 40,000 years ago. Artifacts and bone findings from the last few decades on the mainland and on islands such as Crete also indicate the presence of Neanderthals. It is even speculated that Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis lived in Greece. During the transition from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, there are indeed noticeable differences in architectural and burial rites, but it is now believed that such innovations cannot solely be attributed to mass immigration from the East. It is assumed that there was cultural continuity among local Neolithic population groups. And genetics is now beginning to tell us a great deal more about who these people actually were and where those people came from. In recent years, ancient studies, among them landmark publications in Nature and current biology by research teams from Harvard, the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, and the University of Lausanne, have sequenced genomes from individuals buried at sites across the Aegean, including Manika on Eubea. What they found is remarkable. The early Bronze Age populations of the mainland, the Cycladic and early Minoan Crete, were genetically nearly indistinguishable from one another. They shared the same genetic foundation, descended primarily from Neolithic farmers who had migrated into Aegean from western Anatolia thousands of years earlier, mixed with a secondary component linked to the populations from the Caucasus and Iran. This picture begins to shift, however, around 2300 BC. Precisely the period when Lerna burns and the Korako culture gives way to the Tiryns culture. Genome data from Middle Bronze Age individuals in northern Greece, such as those excavated at Elatilokas in Macedonia, show a dramatically different ancestry profile. Roughly 50% of their genetic makeup now traces back to the Pontic Caspian steppe, the vast grassland stretching from the Black Sea to Central Asia, home to the semi-nomadic Yamnaya-related herding cultures. This steppe ancestry had been essentially absent in the early Helladic populations. Its sudden appearance in the genetic record is a powerful signal. People, not just ideas or trade goods, were moving into Greece from the north. Previously, the immigration of Indo-Europeans and the hypothetical colonization of Egyptians in Boeotia were mentioned. But who were these Proto-Greeks, if we may call them that, and what is the meaning of an Indo-European invasion? Until the 90s, the prevailing belief among ancient historians and archaeologists was that the Indo-Europeans had immigrated to Greece during the early Helladic period. Initially, this theory was based on linguistic arguments. Written evidence only appears during the Mycenaean period, over hundreds of years after the early Helladic. These writings were recorded in Linear B, the precursor to the Greek language. In 1896, linguist Paul Kretschmer suggested that place name endings indicated an Anatolian language rather than an Indo-European one. From this, he concluded that there was a non-Indo-European population in early Bronze Age Greece. However, years later, this theory was disproven when the Anatolian language was identified as an Indo-European one. Innovations such as horses and chariots during the Mycenaean period led archaeologist Carl Blechen in 1928 to suggest that Indo-Europeans had immigrated during the early and middle Helladic periods. However, through the excavation at Lerna, we now know that the domesticated horse was already present earlier, around 2200 and 2000 BC. In addition to linguistic backgrounds, attempts have been made to find or refute evidence of Indo-European immigration through archaeological findings. The destruction of Lerna, Tiryns, Asine and other sites have been interpreted as evidence of an invasion. Archaeologist Colin Renfrew had already suggested an immigration from the Near East during the Neolithic period. German researchers, in particular, believed that the Indo-Europeans came from the north. Kasky, who led the excavation of Lerna, believed that architectural innovations in the settlement, such as apsidal buildings, indicated influences from the north or were brought by immigrants. In 1992, archaeologist Jeanette Forson refuted Kasky's arguments by analyzing 89 archaeological sites on the Greek mainland. She concluded that the destructions were neither temporally nor geographically connected. Later, Renfrew's theory also found support, suggesting that the Indo-Europeans had already immigrated during the Neolithic period. And the ancient DNA gives this position significant weight. The genetic data now supports not one, but multiple migration waves into the Aegean. First from Anatolia during the Neolithic, then a Caucasus-related influx, and finally the steppe-related movement around 2300 BC. Rather than a single dramatic invasion, we are looking at the layer process unfolding over millennia. Although the latest studies and analysis have provided a new understanding of Greece's early and middle Bronze Age, some questions, particularly around the precise timing and regional origins of these migration waves, remain open. Early Helladic period, and thus the Tiryns culture, came to an end around 2000 BC. It was followed by the Middle Helladic period, during which the settlement patterns of people did not differ significantly from the Early Helladic period. However, gradually, certain locations were inhabited or became more densely populated, gaining great importance during the Mycenaean period, such as Mycenae itself and Pylos. Before we delve into this period, which is also associated with the mythological Trojan War and King Agamemnon, we will explore one of the most important trading partners and neighbors of the mainland culture of Greece, the Cycladic culture. This culture thrived on the Cycladic island group in the Aegean Sea. It is said to have engaged in piracy and was also shaken by a volcanic eruption. At the end, I want to thank you very much for listening or watching this episode. It brings me much joy to share my passion for ancient Greece and antiquity in general with you. I hope that you enjoyed as much and that you can learn something new. You would help me immensely if you like and subscribe to my channel. With that, you support me that the channel continues to grow and gain reach. Thank you very much, and I look forward for the next video. Alena, Tiefe History.